Hello again, Nonna here, Chapter 3. Ursula crept into the kitchen next morning while even the sun was still in bed. Aunt Prudence would have had a fit had she known what Ursula was up to, for Ursula was preparing a secret magic spell. She had found the recipe in an old dusty book in the library, and it really worked. All she needed was a currant bun, spread with a filling of honey and porridge oats. The magic words did the rest, and then, hey presto, Ursula would disappear, and in her place would be a real, live bear with a furry brown coat and shiny black eyes, just the sort of bear that Mr. Brown would be sure to trust. Ursula filled Mr. Brown's currant buns with the magic mixture and put them into a small shopping basket. Then she quickly let herself out of the back door and hurried across the street to Mrs. Martinez's house. Only 2 people knew that Ursula could turn herself into a bear. Mrs. Martinez was one of them, and Ursula needed her help for the second part of the spell. She was blinking and yawning when she came to the door in her pink woolly dressing gown. Good heavens, Ursula, it's only 5 o'clock in the morning. It's very early, no? Mrs. Martinez was Spanish and played the flute in an orchestra and always had a lot of trouble saying the letter V. Ursula blurted out her idea. So if you could just make me a beef burger and a few chips, I could take them with me, she said. Then I'll be able to turn back into myself again. I didn't dare start frying in Aunt Prudence's kitchen at this time in the morning. Mrs. Martinez frowned. I don't like it, she said doubtfully. I don't want my little friend eaten up by a bear. But Ursula begged and pleaded until at last Mrs. Martinez gave in. You must be very careful, she said, as the beef burger sizzled away in the pan. You promise, yes? I'll be back in no time, said Ursula. You'll see. The sun was coming up through the trees as Ursula crossed the bridge over the river and set off into the woods. She could see no sign of Mr. Brown's hunters, and she breathed a sigh of relief. They're all still in bed, she told herself. I'll find Mr. Brown before they turn up. Ursula plunged deeper into the cool green woods, looking for a good place to eat her breakfast. Finally, she sat down under a tall elm tree, leaned her back against the trunk, and took one of the buns from the basket. I'm a bear, I'm a bear, I'm a bear, recited Ursula as she chewed. I'm a bear, I'm a bear, I'm a bear. When the bun was finished, Ursula lay down on the moss and closed her eyes. And while she slept, the magic spell began to do its work. Chapter 4. Mr. Brown was wishing with all his heart that he hadn't run away. He was cold and tired and lonely and hungry, and he had a nasty bee sting on the end of his nose. He missed his tasty dinners and his kindly keeper, and he missed the small girl who brought him buns on Friday afternoons. The page is stuck. He stretched his stiff, cramped limbs in the branches of the elm tree where he had spent the night. Perhaps I could catch some fish in the river, he rumbled in his deep, growly voice. Stealing honey from the bees wasn't much fun. Mr. Brown began to clamber slowly down the tree. He had almost reached the bottom when a most delicious smell reached his nose. He wagged his great head from side to side, sniffing the air. Buns, growled Mr. Brown. I can smell buns. He parted the leaves and looked down. At the foot of the tree, on a smooth patch of green moss, a small bear lay fast asleep. A shopping basket lay on the grass nearby, and it was from the basket that the wonderful smell came. Mr. Brown scrambled down and tipped everything out of the basket. He found 2 of his favourite currant buns and a funny, meaty thing with bits of fried potato stuck to it. It was the best breakfast Mr. Brown had ever had in his life, and he was licking the grease from his paws when Ursula woke up. "Mr. Brown," she cried in a growly sort of squeak, "you've eaten my beef burger." Mr. Brown was feeling frisky after his breakfast and wanted to start a game. But Ursula took his big paw firmly in her small one and began to lead him towards the river. "Time to go home, Mr. Brown," she said. Chapter 5. Ursula was so pleased to be with her favourite bear at last that she couldn't help giving little skips into the air as they went along. The sun warmed their faces and birds sang all around them as the two bears came out of the woods into a clearing near the bridge. All at once a great noise roared over their heads. The bears flattened themselves against the ground in fright. Ursula peeped up at the sky from between her paws and her heart thumped in her chest. "Oh, no," she breathed. "They've called out the army." Whirring away above the clearing was a big green helicopter with a thick cable dangling down from its open hatch. Fastened to the cable with harnesses and swaying about in the wind were two soldiers in uniform. Ursula's fur stood on end when she saw that one of them was carrying a gun, and it was aimed straight at Mr. Brown. "Run, Mr. Brown," shouted Ursula. "They're going to shoot you." And then a terrible thing happened. The gun went off with a loud bang. Mr. Brown gave a surprised sort of grunt and sat down suddenly on the grass. The soldier with the gun unclipped his harness and jumped to the ground. He picked himself up and ran towards the bears. "Blimey, George, there's two of them," he called. "I've got the big fella. Throw down the net." A heavy rope net came tumbling down, and the soldier quickly trussed Ursula and Mr. Brown up in it together. Mr. Brown's eyes were closed, and he looked as limp as an old lettuce. "Don't worry about your pal here," the soldier said kindly to the frightened little bear. "I've only put him to sleep for a bit. You'll both be back in your cage before you can say Goldilocks." He clipped the net to the bottom of the cable and climbed back into his harness. "Okay, Dan," he yelled to the pilot over the roar from the whirling blades. "Take her up." And the helicopter rose slowly into the air, taking the two captured bears with it. Ursula crouched on Mr. Brown's stomach and clung tightly to the net with her paws. She felt a bit sick and more than a bit scared, for they were swinging about wildly on the end of the cable and the ground was beginning to look an awful long way away. Ursula wondered fearfully whether the net was strong enough to take the strain, but that wasn't the worst of her troubles. How was she to turn back into herself again now that Mr. Brown had eaten her beef burger? And how on earth could she escape from the zoo once they got her locked up in a cage? Flying about in the sky on the end of a cable was nothing when you had problems like that to worry about. Ursula thought as they skimmed up over the common towards the gates of the zoo. Chapter 6. To the Zoo. Mrs. Martinez paced up and down her kitchen floor. She hadn't had a moment's peace since Ursula had waved goodbye from the gate, and now she had just heard the news on the radio. 2 bears had been captured in the woods, and Mrs. Martinez knew at once that something had gone wrong with Ursula's plan. "My small friend has got herself in trouble again, yes," she said, shaking her head. "I must go to help." And Mrs. Martinez put on her best blue coat and hat and hurried from the house. She reached the zoo quite out of breath, and it took her a long time to push her way through the crowd of newspaper men and television reporters who surrounded Mr. Brown's cage. Mr. Brown lay snoring flat on his back, still sleeping off the drug, and huddled in the corner against the bars, looking sad and lonely and forlorn. Said Ursula, I tell you, I don't know where the little one came from, Mr. Monty was saying. It doesn't belong here, I know that. He pushed his cap back. I wonder if that's Uncle Simon taking videos, Ada. Shaking his head. Beats me what is doing in them woods. Excuse me, please, said Mrs. Martinez boldly, putting a hand on Mr. Monty's sleeve. But that is my little bear. She is a pet, yes, and very naughty for running away this morning, no? Everybody stared at Mrs. Martinez. Mr. Monty looked at Ursula huddling in the corner of the cage. Well, there's no one way to prove it, he said. Well, there's one way to prove it, he said, and he unlocked the cage and led Mrs. Martinez inside. Ursula felt very fed up indeed. She was beginning to think she would be locked up forever, and she couldn't stop worrying about how upset Aunt Prudence would be when she found her missing. So when she looked up and saw Mrs. Martinez in her best blue coat and her cornflower hat, she felt like dancing for joy. She flung herself at her friend with little cries of delight and wrapped her paws tightly around Mrs. Martinez's knees. The keeper laughed and patted the little bear's head. Well, I reckon that's good enough for me, he said. Off you go then, missus. That bear looks all tired out to me. Clear the way, everybody, please. Mrs. Martinez escaped from the reporters and hurried home with Ursula in her arms. The first thing she did when they arrived was to start cooking beef burgers and chips. Ursula sat at the kitchen table and tried to stop her mouth from watering. She was ravenous after all her adventures. When the food was ready, Mrs. Martinez put it on the table and sat down to watch Ursula eat. And Ursula wasted no time, not forgetting to chant the magic words backwards. Rab am I, mumbled the small hungry bear, mopping up tomato ketchup with a crust of bread. Rab am I, mumbled the small hungry bear. And a few minutes later, the spell had worked. There was Ursula herself again, and looking very pleased about it. Aunt Prudence was clearing away the breakfast things and looking cross when Ursula opened the kitchen door. So you've turned up at last, have you? She scolded. It's very naughty of you to go gadding off like that without telling me. I didn't know what to think. She stared at Ursula and made touching noises. Just look at you, child. You're all out of breath. I suppose you've been flying about like a mad thing as usual, haven't you? I'm sorry, Aunt Prudence, said Ursula, and I'm very, very pleased to be home. And she put her arms around her aunt's waist and hid her smiles. That's the end of our first book. I'll read you another one soon. Bye.